let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV. You are Hala Al-Dosari in Saudi Arabia, and I'm really glad you could be with us today. We're going to talk about Saudi Arabian politics and human rights. You're a political activist there, and also something of a writer. You've written for Al Jazeera and for the Guardian about issues in Saudi Arabia. Just to situate our viewers a little, now you are in Jeddah, right?
I live in Jeddah. I'm currently in the U.S. to pursue my PhD education.
Okay.
But yes, I come and go from Jeddah. Yeah.
I see. Okay. And I was in Saudi Arabia a few years ago, and as I recall, Jeddah is one of the less conservative parts of Saudi Arabia. So when I was in Riyadh, which is the capital in the middle of the country, it seemed like I just about never saw a woman without a veil, certainly not without a headscarf.
Yes, that's a true.
Then when I went to Jeddah, you saw, a quite different climate, and many more unveiled women. It's on the coast, and I think most people would call it a little more cosmopolitan. Is that right?
That's correct, and because of the ethnic diversity as well, a lot of the people in Jeddah came from different cultures because it's reported to the two holy places. Most of the residents of Jeddah came from all over the world, if I might say. So they come with more open culture than the more strict patriarchal culture of Riyadh, the tribal culture. Okay.
Now, we've heard a lot about the Arab Spring, but at least to read kind of American newspapers, you wouldn't think that the Arab Spring has affected Saudi Arabia very much. We don't hear much about turmoil there. In fact, the main thing we hear about Saudi Arabia with respect to the Arab Spring is that the government seems to be trying to keep the Arab Spring from unsettling neighboring countries such as Yemen and Bahrain too much. We're not hearing much about ferment within Saudi Arabia. Is the Arab Spring having much of an effect there?
I think you would find the effect of Arab Spring spread across all the Arab region. Saudi Arabia is not an exception. But of course, the type of effect in Saudi Arabia would be a bit different. This is a society where all forms of political, the rights of assembly, for instance, demonstration, protest, everything is censored. So you wouldn't find people able to connect with each other and form parties, for instance, as you find in Bahrain or in Yemen or in Egypt. So mostly you would find people resenting what's going on only on online platforms. You can imagine that there was a call for a protest in Saudi Arabia on 11th of March 2011, but then the streets and everything were lined with police cars. A fatwa or a religious edict released just before that to warn people from going on a protest. So you can imagine that with this type of government or this type of control, it's quite hard for people to express or to form any organized movement. I would say there is an effect, but it takes more time in Saudi Arabia because of the general environment. For assembly or for networking with people. But definitely we have several protests going on, and maybe it's not well announced because it's very difficult for people to go inside and record from Saudi Arabia. Even with journalists and reporters coming to Saudi Arabia, there is a person from the Ministry of Information to accompany them in all their movements. There is a protest actually going on to release political prisoners. We have an estimated 8,000 people in prisons. They are there without trials or without clear sentence.
They're in prison because of their political views or their political activism,
yes.
and they haven't gotten a trial.
Yeah.
And the protests are to protest that in particular?
Yes, people want not only the protests, there were actually petitions for constitutional monarchy. Those kind of petitions have been going on for several years. In 1992, King Fahd, the late King Fahd, he issued for the first time, semi-constitution. But of course, it didn't really give power to people or It didn't really specify the relationship between the state and the individuals. So the Arab Spring have sparked again the need for the constitution. We've seen thousands of people signing on petitions. We have 2 or 3 actually petitions submitted online and to the king for reforms. They weren't addressed, of course, by the government.
So is there a lot more activism online than in the streets? I mean, is that the main place for now that the networking is happening?
Yes, it's online through emails. People have, trying to organize themselves through personal connections.
And the technology is making that easier than it was 20 years ago?
Of course, the technology makes it easier for people to publish their thoughts and for others to lobby and to discuss the thoughts even. You weren't even allowed to speak publicly. So now with the online platforms, you can just access anybody, reach anyone, have active debates about what's going on in the society. Social networks like Facebook and Twitter provides the opportunity for people to get engaged.
And can you, in that context, say Facebook or blogs, Twitter, can you say pretty much anything you want without fear of persecution, or do you have to be careful even there?
Of course you have to be careful. We have a very strict kind of government. What happens is there is a law that was released earlier this year just to combat the effect of networking and online expression. And it really makes people liable for prosecution even if they post their opinions online. Of course, we've never heard of anyone who has been stopped or detained because of his online freedom of expression or anything. But we've seen it before. We've seen several bloggers who are in prisons, who were detained for several years, or some of them for several months. We've seen some of the writers, Muhammad Abdul Karim and several. Earlier this year, they were in jail for about 5 or 6 months. And once they released, they no longer...
What kind of thing did they say that crossed the line?
Political, of course, anything that has a political nature, any calls for discussing the political situation in Saudi Arabia, calling for constitutional monarchy, for instance, or a democratic government, specifying, talking about the corruption in general. Talking about the political corruption is...
So that's dangerous. That's dangerous, even if it's just on a blog or Twitter. I mean, of course, you wouldn't hear it on television or in a newspaper, I guess, right? But even online, you have to be careful about that.
What we do online is we use the interactive platforms. So instead of just writing an article which details all kinds of corruption, we keep it within networks. For instance, we create hashtags to comment on issues, and people put their own opinions or spread the message about what's going on. So as if you're quoting more than stating an opinion or creating a movement. So we try to keep our movement as safe as possible. At the same time, we encourage people to post to post whatever information they have through pictures, through comments. And of course, people do use alias instead of just putting their own names if they have some issues.
And can you speak more freely in English-speaking media? Like right now, can you say things that you would not say in Arabic on a blog or something?
It's not because the Arabic blog are... it's because we wouldn't be able to publish anything in an Arabic platform, an Arabic newspaper, for instance, because of the restriction and the censorship.
I see.
But this is much easier if you want to blog something or write something in the Guardian, for instance, the Washington Post, or in any other newspapers. They don't have this strict censorship. They don't usually omit your... Actually, I stopped writing in my Arabic newspaper because of the censorship. At the beginning of the year, I noted that every time I sent an article, a lot of censoring were happening, so I stopped doing that.
So what was happening when you sent an article to the Guardian or somewhere?
No, the Guardian and all the other international newspaper, they would accept all the comments and all the writings without even editing anything. But in Saudi Arabia, if you want to publish within Saudi Arabia, it would be very difficult to put something, of any criticism to the government. At one point, you would realize that there is no point of writing anymore, since everything is going to be censored and edited and modified.
Okay. But it's more worry about censorship than worry about going to jail. You don't think you've come close to getting arrested or anything?
Personally, I don't. I try to be as objective as possible. I'm not one of the hardliners, critic. I try to follow the rules of publishing as much as I can, but at the same time present the ideas, not the individuals. I think that you learn that there is a very fine line between stating your opinion against a person, and this might cause a lot of problems. Like if you cite, for instance, the Minister of Interior, or you cite the King, or you cite one of the big officials, you might be liable for prosecution. But if you cite a policy, discuss a policy, and this might be a little bit more, safer an approach to criticize.
So you can criticize the issue, the number of people who are in prison because of their political views. I mean, you've actually gone to protests about this, the prisoners of conscience issue?
Yes, there are protests going on to the families and the members of their tribes have tried to raise the issue, have tried to speak with activists online, and they've actually went to the streets, they've demonstrated in front of the Ministry of Interior building. But there were, of course, some of them, not all of them, some of them, I would say the key agents who organized the whole thing, were prosecuted and detained. Of course, not everyone would go to the street. Still, people are afraid because of the harsh reaction of the government toward those people. But we talk about it, we try to raise the issue, we try to transfer the voices of those people who are affected, because it's not only the prisoner of conscience, all the families will be affected. There will be travel ban on certain, whoever is talking about it. There will be problems in job searching. Most of the families, the women are not working. So the family as a whole will be affected, not only the individual who are detained.
Okay. Now, one thing that got a lot of attention some months ago was a woman who, in violation of the Saudi law against women driving, drove a car and put a videotape of her driving a car on YouTube, right?
Yes.
Now, is that the same woman? I also read about it. Was she the one who was sentenced to 10 lashes for that, and then that was rescinded and she wound up not getting that punishment, or was that
Actually, the punishment is still going on, but she didn't get it yet because the case is still submitted for appeal. So the final verdict is not yet released. But Manal Sharif, who posted the first call, is different from Shema Justiniya. Shema Justiniya is the lady who is facing the lashes.
I see.
Manal Sharif, I'm not sure about this is one of the things that we've been discussing a lot in the media and online platforms, the arbitrary verdicts. Like two people are doing the same thing. We have so many women who driven their cars in response to Manal Sharif call to remove the ban and to start, using your cars and everything. Manal Sharif herself was detained for 9 days in prison. She was held as because she violated the orders of driving ban. What happened in so many instances, people who are calling for instance, she's not the first woman to call for driving. It happened so many times. Wajih Al-Huwaidir, she's an activist, a female activist. She drove her cars before and she posted herself in a video. But the difference, I think, is that Manal Sharif has set a date and she encouraged people to go out on the street. That was the difference between her and Wajih. Wajih, she just drove her own car and she talked to women, but she didn't tell them go ahead and do the same in Saudi Arabia. And
was there a big response to that call? Did a lot of women go out on the street?
Of course. I would say we're not really counting on people's response, because in such an environment where women cannot drive because they don't have a driving license, they've never been taught how to drive, it's going to be very difficult for women just to take to the street. But those women who were having a driving license from living abroad, like for me for instance, or other women, they tried to go out and drive their own cars. Not all of them were detained or stopped. Most of them were, writing a legal document that they're not going to drive again whenever they are stopped by the police in the street. And they never drove again, of course. For Shaina Jistania, it was a very weird case because I think the judge wants to set an example. He wants to pick one case where he can just tell the other woman, look what happened if you drove your car. And this what makes us all, upset about it, because there is no law against women driving. It's just a religious verdict that comes into a law. There's
no law on the books.
There is no written. In general, laws are not codified in Saudi Arabia. In general, it's left for the discretion of judges. Whatever is written in laws does not ever specify prohibition of women from driving. Whatever written. But of course, you cannot really rely on written law in Saudi Arabia. A big proportion of, criminal activities and is based on the interpretation of whoever is making the law, who are the religious judges. So the religious judges, whenever they see something unfit or contradictory to the social norms, they would issue some kind of verdict, usually lashes or whips, something outdated punishment.
So do you sense that the movement is growing? I mean, does this movement have momentum, or the movement for women to be able to drive, or has it been stopped for the time being?
What happened is some of the organizers have contacted members of the royal family. They've kind of put a halt to the whole movement by inciting that the king is looking into the issue, and soon enough there will be some, promising verdicts coming as to women driving. I don't rely so much on what's going on a government level, because I know that whatever a woman is concerned is not a priority. We know that there is a big resistance from people who are in key positions. Mostly they are religious fanatics, I would say. Anything related to women are looked upon with so much, suspicion, and they don't ever want to change the situation. They see the situation of women as perfect, according to them. But of course, working women, women who want to lead an independent life, are suffering in meanwhile. Unfortunately, there is not much you can do besides raising the calls. As I said, because you face very harsh, you're not only are liable to detention, you're liable to travel bans. You cannot travel. Your family can be affected as well. Your male relatives can be affected. They can be denied of work. They can be followed and harassed. So it's not an issue of the woman itself. So in such an environment, creating a momentum or individual movement, it's very difficult. I would say that the environment in Saudi Arabia is very unconducive to any social movement or momentum.
And what's another big issue for women there aside from driving? What's high on the list of grievances among people who are agitating for women's rights?
We're looking at the issue of guardianship. You need a male relative in order to be represented in anything, in order to gain access to any of the rights or any of the government offices. You need a guardian. So you can imagine with women who have a guardian, a male relative, who is really absent or just ignorant or abusive at some times, might be very difficult for her to get help or to get access to services. So you can actually go to a hospital, get yourself admitted for any treatment. If you don't have for instance, your husband is not really in good term with you, he can just leave you there without ever divorce you or anything, and you can get stuck in that situation without access to papers, to official papers, without being able to travel or commute.
So you mean if if your husband decides he doesn't like you, you may have trouble getting health care?
Yes, definitely.
Uh-huh.
And not only for you, for the children as well. So if you're caring for children, it's going to be very difficult for you to admit your children for any invasive care, any care that requires admission to the hospital or hospitalization. That's going to be very difficult, beside the primary care. Getting papers for you, official papers for schooling or for any kind of services that requires official documents is going to be very difficult for you. So we're trying to push for removing the guardianship system, so the requirement to have a guardianship.
There is activism on this front. You're in terms of what, online debate? I mean, have there been any protests about this, actual physical protests?
Actual physical protest, because of the so many reasons I've just mentioned, is not really a very conductive thing. It's against the religious edict. It's the government does not really take it very easily. It's a different scenario in Saudi Arabia. As I said, it really puts you at risk. It puts all the family at risk if you go out to the street. And we have seen the only demonstrator who showed on 11th of March is detained in individual detention up till now. It's not really conductive, and people, because of the fear, people don't go and protest. The only thing is to write petitions, is to write whoever is concerned, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to push through writing to individual people, to key people in the government, and of course trying to network with people through online to gather a momentum. And of course the other alternative that we're using is the international media and alliance with human rights organizations. Those issues limiting the movement of women, limiting women access to any services or any rights, or to other problems in the field. We're trying to reach to human rights organization, maybe to international media, to press the government to do something. Because we know that a main concern for the government is not only listening to the people, but how the government is perceived by the international community. Through signing to the international treaties, we know that the government needs to answer why they're not really enforcing the international treaties, the discrimination against women, the freedom of expression, the free media, all the things that the government has signed to oblige with, but they're not really enforcing.
Now, when I was in Saudi Arabia a few years ago, some people in the government were making a big deal of the fact that they were, of two things really. First of all, they were encouraging the building of broadband networks so that more and more homes are going to have access to the internet, and also this thing that they call distance learning, which allowed people to take college courses in their home, and they said that one thing that was going to do was to allow women in particular to get educated. And I thought to myself, you know, they may, this may, from the government's point of view, wind up being dangerous, right? I mean, if they're worried about women mobilizing for their rights, it could be kind of a dangerous thing to get them online and give them a better education, right? I mean, is it playing out that way, that this is kind of a double-edged sword from the government's point of view?
Of course, and you can see that we are one of the countries with the worst, access to information. The number of pages where you can't reach from within Saudi Arabia, the blocked sites, is huge. All the sites dealing with political, opposition. For instance, the sites of Amnesty International was down for several days after releasing a report about the political prisoners. So access to information is way too limited from within Saudi Arabia, online. But people have used, of course people are learning, and most of them having some kind of proxies or something to get over the blockage thing through the officials. So, and of course most of the people are very young, so they're really savvy in the way they use the internet and access the information.
And and women in particular are in some sense being empowered, even just in their homes with access to the internet, notwithstanding the government's attempts to censor. There is, on balance, an empowering effect.
You mean traditionally or from the social setting?
I mean that the women's rights movement ultimately is benefiting from the broadband and the distance learning and all of that, even though the government is trying to control it. On balance, you think it's helping the women's rights movement?
Of course, of course. Actually, my access to all the activists is through online. Without the online access, without having access to Twitter, to social networks, to emails, to blogs, I wouldn't be able to pick those women or to communicate with them.
Yeah, because when I was there was some speculation that actually the government, in making broadband available and encouraging this distance learning, actually understood what it was doing. In other words, there were progressive elements in the government that wanted to empower people in this way because they realized that in the long term it was better for Saudi Arabia to become a more progressive, more secular place, and for the power of the religious authorities to decline somewhat. Is it your sense that there actually are people in the government who understand what the new technology is doing and want it to work?
I'm not really sure about the government wants to empower people, because all the policies, all the selection even of people in key positions, the Shura Council, which is the advisory council, are headed by a religious person. The Committee for Supreme Scholars, which governs almost virtually everything related to policies in the government, are mostly very strict religious scholars. They're not really flexible or open. Even when a couple of them have spoken with, or in favor of women driving, or in favor of some women's rights, they're never heard. They are never heard. The selection of the key people are in a way that, yes, we want to empower people to improve their services, but we don't want to let people share in power or in decision making.
Now, the Shura Council is, although it's only an advisory body and it does not have the power to pass laws, it is an elected body, right?
Yes, it's appointed. Yeah, it's appointed members council.
Oh wait, it's appointed or elected? I thought that the Shura Council had.
We don't have elections in anything. We don't have election except in the municipality. 50% of the municipality seats in Saudi Arabia. We have about 13 provinces in Saudi Arabia, and in 2005, for the first time, after so many petitions, so many calls for reform, 50% of the seats in municipality elections. In municipality provinces were open for elections. And of course, because they failed in giving them enough, authorities, it was a huge failure. So even that people elected few people to represent them at the city councils, they weren't even allowed to do much. They weren't even allowed to view the budget, for instance, or ask officials for explanation. They weren't even allowed to do so many things, so it was a failure. Now the promise from the government is just to allow women to participate.
You mean to vote or to run for office?
To run and to vote in the 50% seats of the municipal counties. And of course they can be appointed. We have already appointed members, female members, but they are part-time advisors. They are only called upon if there is a need for them. And we haven't seen any progress in women's rights or women movement due to the presence of those appointed people in the Shura Council, the Advisory Council. And not in any kinds of rights. We have 2 human rights organizations. They've cited so many violations of human rights, but then nothing has happened to them. Nothing has happened upon recommendation. Which tells you that you cannot just keep on telling people, the government or the officials, that yes, we have issues, we need to correct those issues, without having the authority to act on them. So that's what people need. They don't need people to tell them, yes, we do have problems. They need people to act on those problems, and which is missing in the current government setting or structure.
One question I have is, it's kind of about how much resistance you are going to encounter in the long run in pursuing your kind of political rights and human rights agenda, because I think some people in America may think, you just have this kind of a few people in the government and the religious establishment who are reactionary, who are conservative. But if you can overcome the resistance, you'll be okay. My sense in Saudi Arabia was that especially as you move, into the heartland around Riyadh, away from the coast, away from Jeddah, there's probably a lot of popular resistance to what you want to do, right? I mean, there are a lot of really religiously conservative people, right? Or am I wrong?
Yes, that's true. We do have two fronts to deal with. The official fronts, which is a structure of the government that doesn't allow people to express themselves freely or prosecute people for just expressing their opinions, and it doesn't really allow for the system to grow or to allow people to share in decisions or in power. And we do have the patriarchal tribal society, which wants to keep the assets of males. Like, why would I let women be on their own? They might bring shame to the family. They might be subjected to harm if they are, for instance, driving their cars in public, or there is no trust. So we are working on both things through writings, through presenting women online, and through presenting women voices in the media. We're trying to push the envelope as much as we can. We do realize that it's a long thing, because the education and the environment, the social norms, are totally, against our goals. You're actually fighting an overwhelming battle. But we do believe that women, because of the exposure of women and of men, of course, to the world and to the globalization, they are more accepting now. They are more accepting to change. They are more open to criticize their own, barriers, if I would say. And hopefully one day people will realize that we can do better than that. We can grow. Hopefully that can happen, within the next few years.
So, where do you think you can realistically hope to be, say, in 5 years? What do you think you can realistically hope will be different in Saudi Arabia in 5 years, whether it's women driving or something else?
In Saudi Arabia, it's very difficult to give very sound analysis or expectations, because of the system is way too close to expect anything to happen. The only thing that makes things happening are the king position. So if the king says, let women vote for the municipal election, let women be part of the advisory council, no one else is discussing it. So everybody accepts that. We have seen that before. So it's not only up to what people want. It's a very closed system. I would say we work without really knowing what might happen, but we do our best to just mobilize people. We're not sure of the government response. It took us, for instance, 20 years to spark again the call for women driving. The first call was in 1990. I wouldn't really know what would happen in such a closed system. Things could happen, and we have been fighting since 2005 for political participation, and which is a very more difficult to achieve than driving, and yet it just took us 5 years to happen, which is way too you wouldn't really be able to judge or to expect rationally what is going on up there, because there is no an open window or open channels to.
And I've heard some concern that when King Abdullah is no longer king, it could be that his successor will be more conservative.
I'm not really relying on that. I'm not really saying, because we know it's not about the wish of the king. We know that there are key people up there. It's not one person poll. Those key people join together to set the agenda, and we know that the king has been ill for some years. He doesn't really get involved directly in so many things. And there are advisors who make things happen. It's a power struggle, and we hear about the power struggle on the level of the king and our government. We're not sure because we do believe that other agents, other factors are coming into the formula. The fact that other countries are being changed very rapidly, that might consider people in the government to look out and take reform as a necessity and not an option. Because of the effect of the changes, the rapid pace of changes in the other areas. And of course, the pressure from the international community. We're relying on forming a very good relationship with the international community as activists in order to exert a good positive effect on the government. We know we cannot reach the government directly as individuals from within, but hopefully those people from out there can reach the government and can push for reforms. So I don't believe it's a one-man show. It's just a formula. Hopefully we can be part of this formula.
Okay, well, thank you for taking the time to tell us about it. I really admire your persistence.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, well, I hope you'll be able to come back and talk to us again in the future.
Sure, it will be a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome. Bye.